Hello students and welcome to this video. This is another explanation of year-end adjustments and this question is called New York Pretty Traders. You will see in this question that they also start by giving you a trial balance for the year ended 31st December 2015, and you will see there that we have capital, we have drawings, land and buildings, furniture, vehicles, accumulated depreciations, two of them, one on furniture, one on vehicles. Also inventory, you will see that those are dated at the beginning of the year just to remind you that it's opening values. Then there's a bank account, there's a debtors control, creditor control, sales purchases, a purchase return, rental income, sales and salaries and wages. Then there's also commission income, water and electricity, advertisement cost and stationery. Then you will see that there's additional notes. Again, in number 1, they tell you that the debtor who owes 3,500 Rand is insolvent. This is one of those entries that we have done before. So we're going to debit the credit losses or the bad debts. And we're going to credit the debtor because the debtor can no longer pay. So the asset will be less and the expense will be more. Then they tell you advertisement costs include an amount of 600 Rand, which is a yearly payment for the period 1 March to 28 February. Right, this is again where the financial years don't correspond. So you will see that our financial year ends 31st December, and this financial year for the advertisement ends 28 February. So again, we have a January and February that is too much. So what will I say? I have too much advertisement cost. So advertisement cost, want to make it red. Advertisement cost must decrease, and this is an expense, so of course we're going to decrease it by credit. Then I short a debit, and the debit will be my prepaid expense because the advertisement costs were prepaid for January and February. Then rental income was received for 14 months. What should we do there again? 2 months too much. So the rental income will have to be decreased with a debit entry. I will short a credit entry. And the credit entry that I need there will be called income received in advance. Income received in advance is a liability account. Then in number 4, they say issue a check 1,200 for the payment of water and electricity. So here I pay. Very important word to see there is check. So I am going to debit water and electricity, and I am going to credit the bank because the asset is now worth less. Then they give me information regarding items that are still on hand, and this is typically closing inventory, closing information. And you will see you have inventory left. Again, for inventory, what is the double entry? It is always cost of sales. Closing inventory is the inventory that is still left. So it causes the cost of sales to be less, which is a credit entry for the expense account of cost of sales. Stationery that is still on hand. What will we do there? Well, we have to now make an entry for stationery. So stationery is still on hand. Stationery is the expense account. And for this, the closing entry will cause the expense to be less. So we will have a credit entry in stationery. What will be the debit entry for the stationery? We will create an account called stationery on hand. Right, number 6. Number 6 says a customer returns goods worth 450. These goods were sold on credit. So what does it mean when someone returns something? Then we will work with an account that we call sales returns. right? A sales return is an expense account, and if you have someone who brings back their things, the expense account will increase because it's another sales return. This will then therefore be a debit entry. You will short a credit entry, which will be your debtors account, because the debtor will owe you less, the asset will be less when they return their things. Commission income is still outstanding. So what will we say? Commission income needs to be increased. That will be with a credit entry because it's an income account. What is the debit that we will short there? The debit entry will be income receivable. And remember, income receivable is an asset because if someone still owes you a certain amount of commission income. Number 8 says an employee's salary remained unpaid. So they did not pay this guy for December. So what will we do? Salaries must be increased because they owe salaries. So that will be a debit entry for the expense. We will short a credit entry, which is then your expenses payable. Please note the expenses payable is a liability because you still owe that amount to this employee. Then we need to do depreciation in number 10. It should actually be number 9. I've just noticed, so let's just fix it. So there, depreciation number 9, they say for furniture, it's on straight line, very important, so I need to use the cost. And for vehicles, it is reducing balance method, which is also diminishing balance method, which means I need to use the carry value. Right, the required part says we need to complete the general journal entries and we need to do a statement of profit and loss and other comprehensive income. Alright, I have opened an Excel spreadsheet on which I want us to answer these questions. So I'm going to rename the sheets. The first one will be journals and the second one will be the statement. Right, let us start with the general journal entries. We need space for the account, we need a debit and a credit. Right, in number 1, what did we say? In number 1, it says the debtor is still owing. So there we debit the credit loss because this person is insolvent, and we credit the debtors control. They call it in this question. You will see if you look at the trial balance, they don't call it just debtors, but they call it debtors control. So I just used the same wording there. And the amount that they give to is 3,500, 3,500, and the narration is the debtor is insolvent. In number 2, they have the advertisements. So you will remember there we said that the advertisements needs to be credited and the debit will be the prepaid expense because the advertisements is too much. So I'm going to credit the advertisement cost. I am going to debit the prepaid expense, which is of course an asset account. Please don't forget about that. Right, now I need to go and determine the amount. So they say it's 600 Rand for 12 months. But 2 months are too much. So that should be 50 Rand a month. That should give you 100 Rand too much. So I'm going to debit and credit the amount. I'm going to write a narration and I'm just going to say advertisements paid in advance. Right, that was number 2. How about number 3? In number 3, they say the rent to income was received for 14 months. So I'm going to debit the rental income because it's too much. And I'm going to credit the account called income received in advance. So how much? If I look at the rental income recorded there in the trial balance, it's 70,000 and it was for 14 months, of which 2 months was too much. So if I type that calculation into my calculator, I get to an answer of 10,000. So 10,000 debit, 10,000 credit. And I'm just going to write my narration there. Rental income in advance. Number 4. In number 4, they say they issue a check for the payment of water and electricity. So I'm going to debit the water and electricity expense, if I can ever spell it correctly. Electricity. And we're going to credit the bank account, and the check was worth 1,200. And I'm just going to write a narration there and say, pay water and electricity. Right, we are now at number 5. For number 5, there are 2 entries. So it was closing inventories. They say it's still on hand. So for inventory, what did we say there? We made a note and said cost of sales should become lesser with a credit entry. So I'm going to say credit entry cost of sales. The debit entry for cost of sales is always inventory. And that amount is 25,000 Rand given to me there. The other one was the stationery that was still on hand, and closing inventory causes the expense to be less. So I'm going to say credit the stationery, and I am going to debit the account stationery on hand. And the amount there is 800 Rand. And my description will be record closing inventories provided. Right. Number 6. Number 6 was the return of the goods by the customer. So we said we debit the sales return. This is an expense account. And we credit the debtors control because the debtor owes us now less. And the amount there was 450 Rand. I'm going to make a narration. I'm just going to say goods returned by debtor. In number 7, the commission of 2,000 Rand is still outstanding. So we're going to credit the commission income because it's too little. That's an amount of, they tell you it's 2,000, so we short a debit. And the account that we debit is then income receivable. This is an asset account, and this is income that is still owed to me. If anyone owes me something, it's an asset. So I'm just going to say commission income is receivable. Right. For number 8, want to scroll down. For number 8, we have an employee's salary that was not paid. So I'm going to say I need to debit the salaries and wages. And I need to credit the expense payable because this is now still an amount due to an employee, 3,000 Rand. I'm just going to write there amount due to employee. And the expense payable is, of course, a liability account. Why? Because this is an amount that is still payable. So it's amount that I owe to someone, very similar to a creditor. So therefore it should be a liability. Then number 9 or number 10 as on the paper is the depreciation. And the depreciation is 10% for furniture and 10% for vehicles. But it is for reducing balance method for vehicles, and for furniture it's straight line. So what will I do? I have two different types of assets that I'm working with. So I know I'm going to debit depreciation. And I'm first going to do then the calculation for, let's say, furniture. So I'm going to say credit accumulated depreciation. Those two always go together. And I need to indicate that this is for furniture. Good. Then I need to go and do a calculation. So in the question, they tell me that it's on the straight line basis for furniture. So I need to go and find the cost of the furniture. So the cost of the furniture is 35,000. And there is no residual given. So that's 0. Then I need to go and see what is the rate. They say it's 10%, so I need to multiply by 0.1. And then I need to go and check for the months. Right? So for the months, did they give me a sale or a purchase date, rather? They did not tell me on what date what was purchased. So I need to assume that the furniture was held for the entire year then, if they don't give me a date. So I'm just going to say times 12 out of 12. And this is going to give me a depreciation answer of 35,000 times 10% times 1, because 12 over 12 is 1, and that gives me 3,500. 3,500. I'm just going to highlight this so that you can see it's a calculation, and the description is record depreciation on furniture. Alright, then I also need depreciation on my vehicles. So I'm again going to say debit depreciation. Please note depreciation is an expense account. Then I'm going to say credit accumulated depreciation, but I need to state the specific one that it's for, and this is for vehicles. Okay. Then I need to go and do a calculation. They tell me in the question that this should be based on carry value because it's the reducing balance method. So I'm going to say, what is the cost of the vehicles? If I go to the trial balance, the cost is 45,000, and I less the accumulated depreciation given in the trial balance, and I see that it is 12,200. Then the carry value there is then that one minus that one, which gives you 32,800. There is no residual value given, so that's 0. So the carry value is then 32,800 rand. Right, I need to go and look at the rate. The rate is how much? It is 10%, so I'm going to times by 10%. And I will also look for the months, but they don't give me a specific date on which anything was purchased. So I'm just going to say 12 divided by 12. And then my answer for depreciation is then 32,800 times 10% times 1, because 12 over 12 is 1. So that gives me 3,280. 3,280. I'm going to again just highlight the calculation, and then I'm going to put it into a narration, and I'm just going to say depreciation recorded for this is vehicles. Right, so that is then the journals that I should have done. And in number 2, requirement number 2, they asked me that I should also do the statement of profit and loss. So I'm going to write there, this company's name is New York Pretty Traders. And I'm going to state that this is the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income, and it is for the year ended 31st December 2015. Right, so what is a statement of profit and loss? Ladies and gents, there's a specific layout that you must use. I have given you the layout that you need to study in a template format. So now you just need to use that template and you need to complete the statement. This statement is a summary of income and expenditure. You cannot put assets, liabilities, and equity into this statement. Only income and expenses. So what does the layout look like? You start with sales, right? And I'm going to use one column for a calculation, and this will be my answer in rand value. So what was the sales? If I look at the trial balance, the total sales were 200,000 rand for the year. But it's important, if I have a sales or a purchase return, I need to deduct the sales return from the sales, and I need to deduct the purchase return from the purchase. So did I have a sales return? I did. If I look at my entry that I've made in number 6, there's a sales return of 450. So I'm going to say 200,000 minus 450 for sales returns. So my answer for total sales is then 200,000 minus 450, which gives me 199,550. Next on the layout is cost of sales, and cost of sales is something that I have to calculate. I start with opening inventory, then I have purchases, I have carriage or transport costs, and then I need to less closing inventory. Right, opening inventory, that was given to me in the trial balance as 22,000 rand. Then my purchases was a calculation that I had to do, because the purchases amount given to me was 75,000, but there was purchase returns of 5,200. So a return value I need to deduct. So I'm going to say it's 75 minus 5,200, which gives me 69,800. Was there any carriage amounts in this question? Not in this specific one. And then I need to less my closing inventory. And that inventory amount was given to me in note number 5 as 25,000 rand. So here I now need to go and calculate my total value, and you will see, to insert a line here to make sure that you guys can see. Right, so there's the name, and there's the sales that I've calculated. The cost of sales I now need to calculate. The answer for cost of sales is always a negative value. So I'm going to say it's 22,000 plus 69,800. 69,800 minus 25,000. So the answer is 66,800, but it needs to be negative. So I'm just going to say minus 66,800, because cost of sales is a cost, so it needs to be deducted. Then I get to gross profit, and that is then the difference between the sale and the cost of sales. So if I take the cost of sales and I deduct it from the sales, I get a gross profit of 1,327.50. The next part of my format says I need to have other income. Right, so what other income do I see on my trial balance? Well, I see rental income, and I see commission income. And I need to now go and figure out if these amounts have changed, because the amount given to me for rental income was 70,000, and the amount given to me for commission income was 5950. So now I need to go and see in my journals, did I have any adjustments to these calculations? And I think I do. My rental income was decreased by 10,000. So I'm going to deduct 10,000 there, which will give me rental income of 60,000. And for commission income, I also had an adjustment in a journal somewhere. And the commission income in number 7, I had to increase it by 2,000 Rand for commission income that was still receivable. So I'm going to add 2,000 Rand there, and it's going to give me 7,950. So I need to get to a total for other income, and it will then be 67950 if I add these two other incomes together. Right, what else do I have on my layout? The next one on your layout is called other expenses. So for other expenses, just want to bold the headings so that you can see. Other expenses, let's see, what expenses do I see on my trial balance? Well, there was purchases and purchase returns that I've already put in my calculation for cost of sales, so I can't use it again. Rental income was an income, and I see salaries and wages. That's an expense. And what was the amount given to me? The amount given to me for salaries and wages was 50,000. Right, was there an adjustment? There was an adjustment to salaries and wages in number 8. We had to increase it by 3,000 Rand because the amount was not yet recorded, and that's a salary of an employee. So I'm going to say I need to add 3,000 Rand there, and that will give me 53,000 Rand for salaries and wages in total. Then I must also move on to see water and electricity. That was a value given to me in the trial balance of 9,800. Was there any adjustments? There was. Water and electricity was paid in note number 4, and that caused an increase of 1,200 Rand in water and electricity. So I'm going to add there 1,200. So the total will be a 9,800 plus 1,200, and that gives you 11,000 Rand. The next one that I see on advertisement costs is advertisement costs, and there's also an adjustment to it. So for the advertisement costs, I see that it's 7,000 Rand given to me. But if I go to my journals, I did have an entry for advertisement costs somewhere. There, I had to decrease it by 100 Rand because it was prepaid. So I'm going to say minus 100 Rand, which will give you 6,900. What other expenses do I see? I also see a stationery expense listed there. And the stationery value given to me was 5250, but there was an adjustment in the journals because I had some stationery left that I had to move to stationery on hand. So the stationery will decrease by 800 Rand. So I'm going to say minus 800, which means the stationery expense 5250 minus 800 gives you 4450. So that's everything in my trial balance, and now I need to go and make sure that there are not any other expenses that I've not recorded but that I have done journals for. So let's see. The credit loss. The credit loss is an expense that I've not yet put in my statement. So I'm going to say credit loss. You can also call it bad debts. And the credit loss value, if per my journal, was 3,500. Right, is there any other journals? We did record the advertisement cost. We recorded the rental income, the water and electricity. The inventory we did record. We did make the cost of sales lesser with that. Then this one we did record. The sales return we did deduct from sales. The income and commission income we recorded. The salaries we recorded, but the depreciation we have not yet recorded. So the depreciation must also go under other expenses. So I'm going to say depreciation. Want to scroll up a little bit. And the depreciation was 3,500 for the furniture, plus I have to add there another 3,280 for the vehicles, and that gives me 3,500 plus 3,280. That gives me a total of 6,780. And that seems like all the expenses were then recorded. So I'm just going to make a block around it, and I need to get to total expenses. So that will be the sum of everything. So you now need to add it up, and I get to a value of 85630. 85630, and it needs to be a negative value because other expenses represent an outflow. So now I need to get to net profit. So how do I get to net profit? I will say the gross profit of 132,750 plus other income minus other expenses, and that will give me a net profit of, I'm going to tell you now, 286,330. That cannot be right. Sorry, need to add there. 115,070 is the right net profit. So there I've calculated then the net profit. I've included all my income and expenses, and I have done a statement of profit and loss and other comprehensive income. Alright, so ladies and gents, that's then this video. I hope that you've at least learned something. If you have any questions, please stop by, and I will then see you in a class. Goodbye.